everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Eden Maybon of Light Cycle Astrology. And today I thought I'd give you my take on what Venus is like in the sign of Sagittarius. Today is November the 15th, 2022. So this is the last day that Venus will be in the sign of Scorpio. And by tomorrow, we'll have a Venus in Sagittarius. So I thought I would give you my take on it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share the real-time clock here because this is quite an interesting transition that we see Venus going into. It's a really neat thing because you see now that, let's see here. Why is Venus? So, okay, there we go. Sorry, I had to get the right time on the clock here. Okay, so this is the current position right now in the morning where I am in Hawaii. You got Venus at 29 degrees and 24 minutes. So by the end of my day, Venus will have entered the sign of Sagittarius. So actually, before we get into the archetypal combination of Venus in Sagittarius, I thought we'd kind of take a little bit of a review of Venus's past transit through the sign of Scorpio, because this just gives you a continuation of the story. So back on October the 22nd or the 23rd, you had Venus leave her own domicile of Libra and enter the sign of Scorpio. So when we want to understand a planet from the perspective of the ancient astrological method in a sign, we generally look at the sign's dignity status. So for instance, Venus is at home in the sign of Libra and in the sign of Taurus. So whenever Venus is in Taurus or in the sign of Libra, Venus is at home and she feels very natural to bring about her own natural significations. She's just going to be very Venusian. She doesn't have to get permission or work with another planet's energy being in another temple that's not her own. So, but by October the 23rd, we see Venus now enters the sign of Scorpio. And now Venus loses dignity because she moves out of her own temple. And not only does she leave her own temple, which is a sort of loss of status in one viewpoint, but she also enters Scorpio, which is a temple that is opposite to one of her own temples, that of Taurus across the wheel here. So this is quite a hard transition. Now, interestingly enough, she did so while in Cazimi with the sun. So that was an auspicious moment that may have softened the transition of Venus into a sign where she normally acts in contrariety. Why does she act in contrariety? Well, just by the dignity scheme, we're talking about Venus being in a Mars-ruled sign, and there's very antithetical archetypal energies between Venus and Mars, right? Venus likes to bring things harmoniously together, and Mars likes to independently separate out or cut away. So those two energies are just sort of clashing together sometimes. Now, that tension is also the tension of the lovers, the man and the woman, but that is what creates sexual tension. So it's not to say that Venus is quote unquote bad in Scorpio as a sign of her natural contrariety, but she may act in controversial ways because she's in a dark place. So for instance, Venus as an archetypal spectrum is going to have many different types of behaviors. Sometimes she's going to act beautiful and kind and harmonious and friendly and sociable. But when you get Venus in her darker mode, you're talking about Venus that might do something out of envy or jealousy or greed or lust or coveting, you know, kind of those corruptible versions of something that is beautiful, or ways that we desire things that can be corruptive. And when you're talking about Scorpio, you're talking about a sign that is in the dark half of the year, and it's in the center of the season of autumn. So it's a stabilization into the darkness that is growing or increasing right in the autumn time that is leading up to the darkest night of the year at the beginning of Capricorn, the end of Sagittarius. So you're talking about a Venus that is going into the underworld. It's sort of like Persephone. She doesn't naturally want to be in that dark, brooding, dangerous kind of place. She'd rather be more in Taurus, where she's like sunny and it's springtime. So you kind of get the idea of what Venus is like in Scorpio. And if we go forward now to today, you watch Venus travels through Scorpio all the way until the 15th of November, right there. And by the 16th, now we see Venus has left Scorpio and has entered into the abode of Jupiter, Sagittarius. So, but what's interesting, if we go back a couple of days, we see that Venus, let me see if I can just get my annotation going here so you can see Venus and some of these other planets. It's really neat. As these planets are leaving Scorpio, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, we see that first Venus walks through a trine to Jupiter. Next, we're going to see that Mercury goes through that same trine to Jupiter. And finally, we're going to see the Sun also walking through that trine with Jupiter. So this is really interesting because as planets leave the dark abode of Mars, they get this line of sight direct communication with the new temple lord that they're about to be received in when they move into Sagittarius. So I think this is a really interesting transition. There's a big bump of Sagittarian things. It's sort of like Jupiter isn't home in Sagittarius to welcome them personally, like opening up the door and saying, hey, come on into my home. But it's like he is, somehow signaling them from afar. He says, I see you. Please come on in, welcome, and a trine is of the nature of Jupiter too. So there is a big amount of support for planets leaving sort of this dark quality of Scorpio and the darkness of dark Mars that is just very welcoming as things move into a little bit of a more optimistic place. So I think that is significant or indicative of things sort of improving just in general. You can imagine that some situations out there in the world are going to be reflecting these moves where things somehow move into a little bit more of an optimistic place in general. And there's a big bump of optimism that welcomes the change as things begin to change. That's how I'm viewing sort of the transition as planets move into Sagittarius. I just think that that's a really interesting moment coming up here. So I'll get rid of these lines and you can see exactly when does this happen. Okay, so we got November the 12th. All right, so yeah, November 14th, Venus walks through the trine. November 16th, Mercury has already gone through the trine, and by November 20th, the Sun now walks through the trine, and then by the 22nd, we have all three planets now in Jupiter's abode here. So that is very interesting to me, I think. But let's go back to today. All right, now that we know what's going on, let's just take some time. I've written some keywords or some key phrases that sort of describe both Venus going through the sign of Scorpio or Venus working through the lens of dark Mars. And then I have that contrasted with Venus entering the abode of Jupiter or working through a Jupiter kind of lens. So I'm just going to rattle off some key words here to give you a sense. I'm going to flesh out this archetypal combination of these two. So now I am a native of Venus in Scorpio. So this is something that I use. I was able to use myself as kind of an example to get a sense of some of these keywords or phrases. With Venus in Sagittarius, I have looked up some people, some famous celebrities and whatnot that have this natally, so you can kind of get a sense of this. But let's start with Venus in Scorpio here. So now specifically Venus through the lens of Mars. So you could interpret some of these archetypal combinations of Venus in a Mars sign, but it's a little bit more geared towards Venus and Scorpio because the difference between Aries and Scorpio, they're both Mars ruled, but Scorpio is going to be that more introverted, nighttime, dark kind of archetypal energy that you get with Mars. So, all right, Venus in the sign of Scorpio, we have number one is competing or jealousy for attention. So simply put, you have attention being represented by Venus, and you have Mars, which likes to compete for things. and Mars, who can also get very jealous. So again, we're talking about Venus kind of being filtered through a little bit more of that dark vain quality. And you can get jealousy with Venus when she's acting from that darker place. Um, this is sort of like maybe like may the best man win. There's again this like sort of competition or valor or competition for a mate or a relationship. So you might see people who have Venus and Scorpio being people that are not afraid to go out there and compete for a girlfriend or for a boyfriend, something like this. Somebody that's not afraid to get their hands dirty in a competition of may the best person win to win over the mate. Attraction to mystery. Okay, I'm going to come back to this because this is a big part of the theme, but I want to flesh it out with some of these other ones here. But attraction to mystery, of course, morbid sensuality. You know, things like Anne Rice novels, right? Where you have these vampire novels, these vampiric novels where there is this dark beauty and romance and desire of things that are just generally dark, like vampires are sucking blood. It's very, very, very Venus in a Mars ruled sign. A love of war. It's pretty straightforward. You have Venus who sort of is attracted to fighting or conflict or battle or war, looking for or looking good in a battle, right? So this is also somebody that, or an energy that doesn't just want to fight, but they want to be, they want to kind of do it with some style, have some finesse or grace as they cut you down. They're not just going to be like just barbarically like slashing and burning. This is somebody that's like a ninja, something like that. Celebrating in the dark. Okay, this one I'm getting a little bit from my own meditations on being a native with Venus in Scorpio. Celebrating in the dark, I often have found myself really enjoying going outside at night, being with people, being sociable with people at night under the stars. There's just this sense that there's something fun or enjoyable or sociable or just something you enjoy that is just connected to the darkness of night or the darkness of winter. So this could be even just hanging out in a fire pit, and really enjoying like just looking up at the stars or anything like that, and especially with friends because it's Venus. Attracted to danger or speed. Well, we're getting that because Mars is no stranger to danger and is said to be a planet of speed. So when I was younger and much more foolish, I was definitely a person who liked to drive fast. I raced motocross and motorcycles and did very dangerous, anything that you could drive, I would try to do it fast. Attraction to danger and speed. Love of the deep or darkness. So this is attracted to mystery here too, this sort of theme, love of the deep or darkness. Now, this is a really interesting thing because they always say, oh, Scorpios are so deep, right? We like to get in the deepest kind of, layers of anything that we're looking at. Why is that? Well, if you think about Scorpio season, again, this is the dark of the dark. This is when the light is failing. The light is just increasing, the days are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So we're heading into darkness. If you think about it, there aren't a lot of places that are deep or considered like a deep situation or a deep vision into, deep outer space or deep in a well or deep inside. If you think about the word deep, it often coincides with darkness. So it's interesting that you have the dark part of the year, and people are always describing Scorpios as being very deep people. Well, I think that's why, because you just don't often find uh, within darkness, you get a deepening quality. Also, this is a solid sign, meaning it's a fixed sign. It's not changing into a season. And it's not exiting out of a season. So it's right in the middle of the season. So there's a stabilization, which kind of expands the vastness of the season itself. So I think that's where you get a little bit of a synonymous thing with deep and darkness are kind of coming together right there, or you usually have one with the other. If that makes sense. Um, Romantic tragedy. Okay, this is something that I have definitely noticed in my own life as a native with Venus in Scorpio. There is this now, as I've gotten older and a little bit more mature, and I don't really do this so much with my life anymore. But when I was young, there was this very like Romeo and Juliet kind of tragic love kind of thing that I was almost addicted to. And I think this really speaks to Venus and Scorpio. It's like you want love, but you can't just have any love. It has to be somehow tragic. And that's because, it's in the dark of the dark. There has to be something dark that happens with the love story. It's boring if it's just all easy and there's no fights, there's no breakups. It has to be kind of like involving something, uh some blood, or some just really dramatic dark flair to it. And, Venus is kind of dramatic as well, so I often found that, like, I was getting involved with relationships that had some very tragic types of things, and as I've gotten older, I've tried to stay away from some of that drama. But um okay, we have dark magic, wintry holiday decorations. Okay, this is really interesting. I never actually realized this about myself until I tried to come up with some of these keywords, but I am a huge fan of decorating my house for holiday festivals, Christmas, Thanksgiving, anything. And I noticed I get into them a little bit in like for the Easter or for the summer solstice, but I'm much more interested, apparently, for Christmas time and things like this. I really get into decoration. So I'm like Clark Griswold, get out the ladder, I'll put it up. The whole house has gone crazy. Everybody thinks I'm a nut. But what I realized is it's Venus in Scorpio. It's like it's celebrating Venus in for festivities that occur in the winter months or the autumnal months, right? So I think it's pretty straightforward, but I think that's also really interesting where you're looking for some kind of archetypal combination that says, I want to celebrate the darkness, or I want to have celebrations at the dark time of the year. And Venus likes to decorate things. So there you go, Christmas lights. Um, let's see here. Witchcraft. Uh, we have, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Dark desires, longing for stormy beauty. Yeah, I remember being as a kid getting really excited for the autumn time where the storms would come through and the sky would get really dark. And I'm from Washington, so you're thinking, you're kind of thinking like dark gray, blue, stormy, howling kind of autumnal nights. That was often the case when I was a kid, and lightning and thunder. And it was very just dark. And I would get really excited. I would really enjoy that, or I was sort of attracted to that. All right, let's see here. Some of these very interesting ones are sacrifice for love. Mars likes to sacrifice things. Um, and uh, let's see. Oh, cleaner of dirty objects. Yes, this one is really interesting. A cleaner of dirty objects. Well, Venus is often associated with cleanliness or being really clean. So when you have cleanliness mixed with Mars, which is kind of like dark and grimy and dirty, you can see that you get those two combinations. It's like I've always enjoyed both. And one of the examples of this is when I was a child, I would try to get my BMX bike as dirty as I could. I would literally on purpose, like the mission was, how many mud puddles could I go through? How how much mud could I get on the bike? And at the end of it, the bike was completely muddy. It was literally, there was no spot left that just wasn't muddy. But the interesting thing was is I used to really like to then take it into the garage and just clean it, like very meticulously so. So there's this interesting combination of, I do the same thing now as an adult. If I clean, I'm like a meth addict, right? Like I clean really dark and dingy places. Like I don't just clean the kitchen. Like I'm pulling the stove out to get behind, right? There's a very Scorpio kind of way of cleaning when you have Venus in Scorpio, I think. I don't do meth, by the way, but but it's like that kind of intensity of like I'm not just gonna surface clean, like it's gonna be much more deeper. I'm getting into the dark, deep places in the house, you know. I'm doing the baseboards and the top blades of the fan, and just it's just kind of too much almost, really. Okay. Then we have, let's see here. Uh, pleasures in the absence of God. Wow. I really like the sound of this. Pleasures in the absence of God. I don't really mean God, but I mean more like light, because you're in the dark half of the year. So the light is, it's depressed in the sign of Libra. It's getting more dark in the sign of Scorpio, and it isn't until Capricorn that it returns. So it's, the light is sort of a symbol for law and order and morality and unity and cohesiveness. And it's sort of like darkness represents the chaotic, destructive forces where everything is broken apart and decaying and going into the underworld, or living in deep space where there isn't gravity pulling things together. So there's a little bit of an interesting freedom, I think, a love of sort of this unlimited vast potential of atomized things, you know. I feel like it's less restrictive. Like I don't just have to love, as a native with Venus and Scorpio, things that are very ordered or dogmatic or of, you know, of the status quo. It's like I have a lot of freedom to just be completely like free to love anything, even if it's questionably moral. Now, I am a very moral person. I like to think of myself as, but I am not afraid to at least entertain an interesting idea to me. And I think that I don't have those barriers of entry for potentially liking something that is outside of the status quo or the order, or, you know, the established kind of dogma of things. Um, okay, attracted to raw power. Attracted to raw power. Okay. So the reason is pretty much the same as the last one. Raw power just means that things are not ordered together. You have like, for instance, like Einstein came up with E equals mc squared, which is kind of like, hmm, you're thinking about things that are broken apart, and what is the innate energy in all these broken apart pieces that happen when life becomes obliterated in the fall time. So there is this attraction to little pieces that you see potential in when you have Venus in Scorpio. So I go around my house and I look at things and I'm like, okay, I want to build something. I like to think of myself as somebody that can really take a lot of different little things that are unrelated, and I see potential in them. I can build something. Whereas like if I maybe had Venus somewhere else, I might be limited in thinking that way, where I might see a screw and go, okay, well, I can only use this as a screw because it's a screw. But with Venus in Scorpio, it's like I'm attracted to the idea of saying maybe that screw could be a nail because I don't have a nail, you know. Let me try to, it's probably a bad idea, but let me try to pound this thing with a hammer. Maybe I don't have my screwdriver and I'm like, I see the screw. I'm the type of person that that would try to maybe bang that thing in. That's very Mars, very forceful, you know, and Venus gives me that attraction to the potential of just inanimate objects. So attracted to the raw power of things. And I think that a lot of Scorpios are like this. They can see the potential of things because we're in a dark place where everything is broken apart and things are not put together in the fall time. Things are breaking down, if that makes sense. So that is a quite an interesting archetype of Scorpio just in general. But with Venus there, I think the attraction is heightened a little bit. Okay, the beauty of the fall. This is a little bit going back to like the love of like uh dramatic, like a Romeo and Juliet kind of dramatic fall, or like there's something beautiful when you have Venus in Scorpio, when things fall apart or when things go through a dramatic collapse or something like this. There's, I don't know how to describe it, but I think with Venus in Scorpio, you can appreciate, or you can sort of get that loving feeling in your heart when something fails. Confident lovemaking. Yeah, you have Venus, which is an erotic planet, and you have Mars, which is, a very confident and willful planet. So I think that Venus in Scorpio could be an archetypal energy that says, I'm not shy. I've got the sword. Let's plow some things, like it's just not a shy combination, just in general. Quick to fall in love. You have Venus, which is love, and you have Mars, which is speed. So quick to fall in love. Okay, a couple of last few ones here. Beauty and valor. Beauty and the beast. A beautiful ugliness. Well, this one's interesting because Venus is generally thought of as a beautiful planet, and Mars is the opposite of Venus in certain ways. So Mars could be thought of as a planet that represents ugliness. So sometimes you get these strange combinations where something is like, you look at it one way and it's like, it's kind of beautiful. But then you look at it another way and you're like, but it's kind of hideous. And I actually think that I kind of look like that because I have Venus in Scorpio, but I also have, I am also a Scorpio rising. So sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and I'm thinking, you're a handsome guy, and then other times I look at myself in the mirror and I'm thinking, holy smokes, you're hideous, your nose is crooked, whatever. So I think that we get this interesting combination where we kind of get a mixture of beauty and ugliness kind of mixed in there together. Object obsessions like toys. Yeah, Scorpio is just one of the keywords, obviously, for Scorpio is obsessions, and Venus can be very materialistic. So you could get this combination where you really like something, you're obsessed with something. Definitely as a kid, I was obsessed with certain toys. Not a lot. I wasn't crazy about having. I wasn't spoiled, but there were certain toys that I feel like I was probably more obsessed with than the average child. But it's hard to judge that. But okay, and last but not least, is relational psychologist. Yeah, this goes to when you have Venus in Scorpio, the Mars wants to be penetrative. It wants to go deep, right? Because it's a Mars that's in the dark half of the year. And Venus is all about relationships with people. So I find myself being really interested in certain topics. I think my love of astrology really is almost because of this aspect right here that I have, which is just, I like astrology because it helps me understand the people around me. It helps me. I even like to get involved with how other people can learn astrology and understand how their relationships are functioning based on this psychological thing that sort of comes back to Venus being in Mars's Scorpio house. So yeah, all kinds of things like this. Like they have I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, but like what is the like Love is Blind? They had that one on Netflix, and I like that stuff because I'm really interested in the deeper psychological um occurrences that people go through within specifically like relational types of ways, relationships and marriages and dating and all that stuff and red pill. And so I've always been really interested in that. So I think that anybody with Venus and Scorpio could be really interested, could end up with being a professional like a marriage counselor or relational psychologist or something like that. Okay, so that is my very long list of Venus going through Scorpio, but now we're going to contrast it with Venus moving into Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius. And remember, as Venus goes today into Jupiter's sign, she's already kind of been walking through that trine to Jupiter. So let's give this one a shot here. This one's a little bit shorter, but you'll be able to see the changes a little bit. Now, there is some blending, there is some carryover a little bit. But let's go through Venus through Jupiter's house of Scorpio. Excuse me, Jupiter sign of Scorpio. We have female stars. I tend to think of as Venus just in general as potentially signifying very beautiful rock star women or Hollywood actresses, or just in general very kind of young, vivacious celebrity kinds of women. And when you have Venus in Jupiter, you're talking about somebody that is incredibly famous, is incredibly well known, and has that just vivacious uh, celebrity status, that high expanded, larger than life kind of celebrity status. So we're talking about women like, Angelina Jolie, or just, the Queen, or something very, very high in status as a celebrity, beautiful celebrity, or beautiful, actress or somebody like that. We have female athletes. My example for this is, the last time I watched the Winter Olympics, you had those teams, different Olympic sporting events were having like women on teams, like the bobsledding, or the long distance skiing relay. It's kind of like this thing, this kind of wintry female athlete that is potentially maybe even working with teammates and things like this. It's very Venus and Jupiter sign. Erotic workers. This is my example for this is like Nicki Minaj. Now I know she's not an erotic worker, but in a sense she is, because she's this kind of almost goes to the first one of female stars, right? But she's a combination of like a female star and like somebody who works in eroticism, because both Venus and Jupiter are erotic planets. But there's this sense in which eroticism is kind of exalted or lifted up, and is really singing quite loudly here with these two planets filtering, or Venus filtering through Jupiter. Overindulgence, that's pretty obvious for that one, but you have Venus, which likes to take pleasure in things, and you have Jupiter, which likes to blow everything out of proportion. So definitely you can have some pretty big overindulgence tendencies with this one. Courtroom or church janitors. This one's just kind of a funny one, but again, Venus is a planet that is often associated with cleaning or cleanliness, and Jupiter's a place that's associated with churches or courtrooms or law or something like that. So I could see, in a way, somebody maybe that has Venus in Sagittarius that's just a regular bloke, could be like the guy that comes in and puts the English gold on on the courtroom wood or something like this, and like kind of that kind of a thing. Um, Marriage lawyers or counselors, and this is where I say there's almost a little bit of a blend between the two. Venus in Scorpio and Venus in Sagittarius. There's a little bit of a blend, because here you have lawyers, obviously Jupiter being a representative of law or counselors, and marriage, which is relationships again. High-powered businessmen. Yeah, this one for me is like, I was struggling to get like a title for this kind of position, but those movies, you have that guy, he's like up and coming, he's trying to make partner in the firm, and his boss comes to him and says, "Hey, I need you to take the clients out on the town tonight, show them a good time, try to get them to become our client. It's a huge account for us, blah blah blah." It's kind of like that. It's kind of like somebody that has this, they're connected to wealth or importance. They're high up in the firm, but they're also working with Venus and having to entertain or show people a good time in order to win clients over and get accounts and things like that. It's sort of like that archetype, right? Where there's like the high powered kind of wealthy guy that's up and coming and getting clients through entertaining and taking them to strip clubs or whatever, something like that. Let's see here. Psychology professor. Okay. Again, we've got yeah. No, I sorry, I read that wrong. Sociology professor. Excuse me. Sociology professor. Now, interestingly enough, I actually have Samuel Jackson as this example, because you get sociology, obviously Venus, and professor, obviously Jupiter. But think of Samuel L. Jackson, is it? Samuel L. Jackson. you know, when you see his character roles like Pulp Fiction or something, you see him deliver those great scenes where he's like sort of chastising somebody on how to be socially acceptable. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? You know, he does this. He's really, really good at sort of being the professor of sociology, as it were. He's able to really kind of hone in and give you the law, give you the sense of moral, like acceptable behavior or action, right? And it's usually in the context of like social etiquette or social behavior, you know, or social understanding, right? And I just see him as this character where he's always really good at playing these types of people that somehow has the wisdom and the knowledge to deliver down from on high, like to people, like, hey, don't you know, be cool, don't shake hands like this, do it like this, like enter the room like that, don't do it like this, you know, these different things like that are kind of a little bit my example for sociology professor of sorts as an archetype. Okay, and let's see here. A young queen or a queen's younger sister. In ancient astrology, Venus was associated with young women or young sisters. But again, because it's expressed through Jupiter's sign, you have, you know, Jupiter is associated with kings, but because this is Venus, you might see somebody that is like the sister of the king or or the sister of the queen or something along those lines. Somebody like Princess Margaret, um, Countess of Snowdon, right? Somebody like that. An art professor, somebody that is dealing with the artistic side of Venus, but is also knows the doctrines or the dogma of the artistic world, like almost like an art, maybe like not an art curator, but somebody who manages like an art museum or something like that, somebody that is managing an art gallery, right? Somebody that knows exactly how to aesthetically display the art, maybe somebody that is a teacher of art technique, something like that, right? Okay. A recovering alcoholic. Yeah, this is one of my favorites because there's a story arc with this one because Sagittarius is a double-bodied sign, meaning it is a mixture of it's a little bit of a mixture of Scorpio season and Capricorn season coming together there. So in ancient astrology, it was called a double-bodied sign. It's because it's the end of the season, so there's a little bit of a mixture and a transition from the end of fall that is transitioning into the beginning of winter. So there's a bit of a mixture with the two seasons during Sagittarius, which is why it was called double-bodied or double-seasoned. And so oftentimes you have the first part of Sagittarius is about going darker and darker and darker, but then the second half of Sagittarius is generally about seeing the coming light being returned at the winter solstice, where the sun begins to rise again. So you reach the shortest day of the year, but then the sun begins to come up and lengthen the day from that point forward. So at the second half of Sagittarius season, there's usually this story arc of redemption where something goes dark, 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 but then it gets more and more optimistic and hopeful for the return of light. So the return of the king, as it were. So there's this story arc. So let's run Venus through this story arc. All we have to do to look at that is you imagine like Venus being, you know, kind of again going through a dark mode in a dark time of the year, maybe expressing some of her darker qualities like being materialistic or self-centered or kind of overindulgent, you know, Venus just being too much, corruptible somehow. And then there's like a recovery that happens at the end of the story arc, you know. So my example is like a recovering alcoholic who spends all that time, you know, indulging and binging and drinking, and then winds up having to find redemption and hope at the end of the arc, right, where it's something is like coming towards the light again. So Venus going through, you know, you could make this into a few different examples, like It could just be like eating, like having not a good diet this Sagittarius season, and then somewhere at the end of it going, man, I really need to get towards that New Year's resolution, or anything like that. Really, maybe an exercise routine. So there's this potential story arc of indulgence with Venus, pleasurable things with Venus, self-centeredness or greed or something materialistic with Venus running through her darker mode, but then cleaning up. Interestingly enough, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they refer to a recovering alcoholic as somebody who's getting clean, quote unquote. So again, Venus has to do with cleanliness. So it's like Venus goes through that dark, grimy mode at the beginning of Sagittarius, the overindulgence, the corruptible Venus, and then gets clean as she moves towards the end of the story arc at the end of Sagittarius. Okay, just a few more here, guys. A natural adventurer. Yeah, somebody that just really wants to be out in nature, doing adventure types of things. But you know, it's like somebody that loves the beauty of nature, like a rock climber, but a rock climber that's doing it for competition, doing it for grandiosity on some level of achievement or adventure, but somebody that really enjoys the beauty surrounding them as they're out there. I could especially see this with anything in the mountains, because Sagittarians generally have this very connectedness to mountains because mountains are kind of wintry. Okay, a fitness guru. Jane Fonda is my example here, right? So you're getting fit, but you're sort of doing it for a Venusian reason, right? You're sort of saying, well, I want to be healthy, and that's important, but I also want to be clean, and that's important. But really, I also really want to look attractive and look good for, you know, my age or whatever. Very Venus in Sagittarius. An adventurous artist or musician. My example here is David Bowie. So David Bowie he had Venus in Sagittarius, and he was a man who didn't just make, you know, status quo music, right? He was a musician that made art that was very like, wow, it was outside of the box. It was rebellious in a sense, but this isn't really the rebelliousness of like Venus in a Saturn ruled sign, where Saturn would be like an outsider kind of rebel that could alienate certain sections of society. This is more of a rebelliousness that is somehow still enjoyable and lovable, which is very David Bowie, I think. Okay, two more. We have promiscuity. Again, we have Venus running through a double-bodied sign, a sign that is bold and adventurous, and likes to take risks and chances, and is very sexual. So I could definitely see Venus and Sagittarius having an archetypal combination that says, you know, this is just a promiscuous kind of energy. With double-bodied, it's like you want to love all kinds of things. You want to be free to potentially love this person and that person, and not saying that if you have Venus in Sagittarius that you're unfaithful in your relationships, but I think that there is some expression on that kind of promiscuous kind of nature, where maybe it's even not in through like like a a relationship, maybe it's with hobbies or something like that, but there's something promiscuous, there's something double-bodied where you can love multiple things here, and you're adventurous in doing so. All right, and last but not least, we have beloved adventure stories. So Mark Twain had Venus in the sign of Sagittarius, and you know, he, if you think about Mark Twain, you're thinking about somebody that was you know, you just get a warm feeling from these like Huckleberry Finn type of novels, right? It's all about adventure, but there's this it's kind of rebellious, but again, it's in like this lovable Venus kind of way. It's like warm-hearted, you know, Huckleberry Finn kind of storyline. So that wraps up the archetypal combination for Venus through the sign of Sagittarius. Now, this is something we'll enjoy for about 30 days or so as Venus travels through Sagittarius. So leave your comments in the comment section below, because let me know if you have any combinations that you'd like to point out, because these are just some of the things that I came up with. But, you know, there are virtually endless kind of combinations when we're talking about Venus going through Sagittarius. But thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you got something really good for this. And please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll be back real soon with some more astrology content. Bye.